Midnight knocking. On a cold autumn night in a small town, there was an old house at the end of a deserted street. This house had long been abandoned, and the townspeople whispered eerie tales about it. It once belonged to a widower known for being cold and reclusive, never interacting with neighbors. After he passed away, the house fell into decay, shrouded in dust and overgrown with vines. But what haunted people wasn't its dilapidated state, it was a mysterious legend. Every midnight, anyone staying inside the house would hear knocking at the door, steady and insistent, as if someone wanted to come inside. One day, Linda, a young woman who recently moved to town, heard about the strange story. Curious and fascinated by mysteries, she decided to explore the truth of the midnight knocking. Her friends tried to dissuade her, but she brushed them off, dismissing the stories as mere superstition. That night, Linda took a flashlight and made her way to the old house. The windows rattled in the cold wind, creating an eerie atmosphere. She opened the door and stepped inside, her flashlight barely cutting through the thick darkness. The air was icy, as if time had frozen inside the walls. Dust-covered furniture lay untouched, and only the creaking of the wooden floorboards disturbed the silence as she moved. Linda chose an old chair in the living room and sat down, determined to wait until midnight. Her eyes adjusted to the dark, though an unsettling feeling gnawed at her. Time passed slowly, every second stretching on endlessly. At the stroke of midnight, the silence grew so dense she could almost feel it. Then a knock echoed through the house. The sound was hollow and chilling, reverberating through the walls. Linda held her breath, unsure if she'd heard right. The knocking continued, steady and relentless. Her heart raced, and her breaths came quicker. Summoning all her courage, Linda moved toward the front door and peered through the peephole. Outside, only thick darkness met her gaze. No one was there. She opened the door and looked around, finding nothing. As she turned back, the knocking resumed, this time from a small room in the corner. Curiosity won over her fear, and she cautiously approached the room. The moment she opened the door, the knocking sounded again, closer than ever. Inside, she found a small table with an old photograph on it. In the photo stood a man with empty eyes, his face emotionless. She felt a chill down her spine when she recognized him as the former owner. Suddenly, a knock resounded right behind her. The room grew darker, and as she turned, a shadowy figure stood before her, the man from the photograph. His expression was cold and hollow. He lifted his hand and knocked again, as if testing her reaction. Linda tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. At dawn, the old house stood silent again. Linda's friends arrived, worried when she hadn't returned. They entered the house and found everything as it had been, except for one new detail, a photograph on the living room wall. The photo showed Linda, standing beside the hollow-eyed man, her gaze distant and lifeless. That night, the knocking continued, a chilling melody greeting those who dared to visit the house, destined to be forever trapped in the haunting midnight knocking. The Field of Souls. On a cold November night, when thick fog covered everything in sight, the desolate fields on the outskirts of a small town became eerily silent. The field had been abandoned for years, and no one dared to go near it anymore. Rumor had it that on autumn nights, the field became a gathering place for lost souls, people who had passed away but couldn't find their way back to their families. An American named Jack, visiting the town, heard about this tale. A lover of exploration and a skeptic of ghost stories, Jack decided to visit the field that night to test the rumors. Local townsfolk warned him, but he only laughed, viewing it as an exciting challenge for his journey. When night fell, Jack took a flashlight and headed toward the field. The sky was pitch black, no stars in sight, and a thick mist covered the desolate field. Jack's flashlight barely pierced the darkness, creating an unsettling aura around him. The field stretched out endlessly, with dead trees standing like skeletal hands reaching out of the ground. Suddenly, Jack heard a whisper, faint and distant, like the wind but more distinct. He stopped and listened, realizing that the whisper seemed to be calling his name. His heart began to race, but he kept moving forward, telling himself it was just a trick of the mind in the dark. As he ventured deeper, a white mist began to rise from the ground. Shadowy figures emerged, with pale faces, empty eyes, and lips moving in silent pleas. Jack squinted to see clearer and realized they were souls, people no longer of this world. One figure, an elderly woman with wrinkled features and sorrowful eyes, approached him, extending her hand. "Please help me. I can't find my family," she whispered, her voice shaky and filled with despair. Jack took a step back, his heart pounding, but his fear was overshadowed by curiosity. Other souls also moved toward him, each whispering stories. A lost child, a man seeking his family, a soldier who died without a proper burial. All were forgotten souls, unable to pass on because of their unfulfilled desires. Feeling surrounded, Jack tried to leave, but the spirits clung to him, cold hands reaching out to pull him back. He felt each chilling breath on his skin, and every anguished cry echoed in his mind. In a panic, Jack stumbled and fell, his flashlight rolling away, casting only a faint glow in the dark. For a moment, Jack felt hopeless, as if there was no escape. The souls kept advancing, and their sorrow seemed to seep into his very being. Just as he thought all hope was lost, a faint light appeared in the distance, like the warm glow of a house. With the last of his strength, Jack got up and moved toward it. As he neared, the souls slowly disappeared, leaving him alone in the eerie silence of the field. Jack turned and ran, vowing never to return. The next day, back in town, Jack told his story, though no one believed he had actually encountered spirits in the abandoned field. Yet, from that day on, whenever he looked into a mirror, he could see the faces of the souls reflected in his eyes, a haunting reminder of the night he crossed the line between life and death in the field of souls. The moving shadow. In a remote small town, there stood an old house at the end of a narrow road. This house had been abandoned for many years, and strange things were said to happen inside. At night, townsfolk often heard peculiar noises coming from it, especially the sound of footsteps with no one in sight. The tale of the moving shadow had become a ghost story passed down through generations. One day, Tom, a 20-year-old young man, decided not to believe in the supernatural and resolved to explore this house. Tom was an adventurous soul, keen on uncovering mysteries. After hearing about the house, his curiosity piqued, and he arranged to go there with a few friends on a bright moonlit night. As night fell, Tom and his friends gathered at the old house. The bright moon cast eerie shadows on the walls. They turned on their flashlights, the weak beams cutting through the thick darkness. The front door creaked loudly as they opened it, revealing a silent space filled with a heartbeat of tension. Inside the house, everything lay undisturbed but coated in dust, as if time had stopped. Tom led the way into the living room, where an old sofa and a decaying wooden table stood. Suddenly, they felt a chill pass through them, as if someone had just walked by. "Did you feel that? Like something is here," one of Tom's friends whispered. "It's just the wind," Tom confidently replied, determined not to let fear spread among the group. As they continued to explore the rooms, Tom suddenly stopped in front of a door leading to the basement. This old door looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Drawn by the mystery, Tom decided to open it. He pulled hard, and the door groaned as if it were in pain. Stepping inside, the basement was pitch black, and a musty smell enveloped him. Tom switched on his flashlight and illuminated the area. Suddenly, he saw a shadow dart across the corner of the wall, quick as lightning. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He called for his friends, but there was no answer. Turning around, as the beam of his flashlight grew strong enough to reveal his surroundings, he discovered they had vanished. "Where are you guys?" Tom shouted, his voice echoing in the stillness. Never before had he felt so lonely and afraid. He knew he needed to escape before it was too late. As he turned to flee, he saw the shadow once again. It stood in the middle of the basement, seemingly staring at Tom. He breathed heavily, filled with anxiety. He slowly realized that this shadow was unlike any ordinary shadow. It had the ability to move and even change shape, as if trying to communicate with him. "Don't be afraid," a voice echoed softly but chillingly. Tom froze as he realized the sound was not coming from the shadow, but from deep within his mind. "I just want to escape from here." The shadow advanced closer, and Tom felt an eerie power emanating from it. Unable to bear it any longer, he dashed up the stairs, fleeing the basement. But when he opened the door, he found only darkness, seemingly no way out. Time felt as if it had stopped, and Tom sensed the surrounding space changing. the walls began to shake, and the light from his flashlight started flickering. In his panic, he realized the shadow might be trying to help him escape, but its methods only heightened his fear. Finally, Tom closed his eyes, relaxing all his tension. He concentrated on the voice of the shadow. "If you want to get out, trust me," it said. Tom took a deep breath and nodded. He felt a connection forming between him and the shadow, a power from the souls that had been abandoned in this house. At that moment, the light from his flashlight suddenly returned, illuminating a narrow pathway. The shadow slowly led Tom down that path. They navigated through the dark walls, and as the light grew brighter, Tom felt the power of freedom. Eventually, Tom stepped out of the house, feeling as if he had just returned from a nightmare. The shadow lingered in the darkness, flickering like a farewell. Tom turned back, glancing at it one last time, feeling a deep empathy. He knew the shadow remained there, waiting for the next person seeking the truth about what had transpired in that house. When he returned to the town, Tom couldn't forget that strange experience. Although the shadow had vanished, it left him with a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the mysterious isn't the scariest part. Rather, it is the ignorance and loneliness of the souls that need to be freed. The moving shadow was not just a ghost story, it was also a journey of self-discovery. The Faceless Man. In a small town by the riverside, where tall trees reached for the sky, there was a strange story about a faceless man. Everyone in town knew of him, but no one knew where he came from or why he had lost his face. He often appeared in the late afternoons when the sunlight began to fade and the atmosphere turned gloomy. Wearing a tattered black cloak, he wandered around the town, his hollow eyes seemingly searching for something. Children in the town would whisper about him, saying he was a ghost, a man punished for some past sins. The adults, on the other hand, preferred not to mention him, believing he brought misfortune. Everyone felt a mix of fear and curiosity about the faceless man. One evening, as night fell, a girl named Sarah, known for her brave and curious nature, decided to uncover the truth about him. Sarah had heard many stories about him since she was a child and could not resist her curiosity. She gathered a few friends to embark on this adventure. Sarah and her friends gathered at a small cafe before venturing out. They discussed what might happen and how to approach the faceless man without frightening him. Their hearts were filled with excitement and anxiety, but Sarah was determined not to let fear hold her back. They began their journey along the path leading into the forest, where the man was often seen. The chilly evening air enveloped them, and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot created an eerie atmosphere. As they entered the forest, they felt the heaviness of the air grow thicker. Suddenly, a noise echoed from afar. They stopped and looked at each other in fear. "It could be him," one of Sarah's friends whispered. They decided to move toward the sound, their hearts racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. After searching for a while, they spotted a figure standing silently beneath a large tree. As they approached, they recognized it was the faceless man. He stood still, as if waiting for them. His black cloak billowed in the wind, and his deep-set eyes stared intently at Sarah, as if searching for something within her. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to back down. "Hello," Sarah spoke, trying to keep her voice calm. "We don't mean to disturb you. We just want to know about you." The faceless man didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, silent, as if he were contemplating something. Finally he spoke. "Why do you wish to know about me? I am merely a lost soul with nowhere to go." Hearing these words, Sarah felt a surge of empathy. "Could you tell us your story?" she asked. He lowered his head, and Sarah could see a profound sadness in his eyes. "Once, I was just a regular man like you. I had a family, a job, but one day I made a wrong decision. I betrayed the ones I loved the most, and from that day on, I was punished." He went on to recount his life, detailing the mistakes he had made. He had deceived his wife and children in pursuit of hollow dreams, and when the truth was revealed, he lost everything. The weight of regret had transformed him into a wandering soul, unable to find peace. Sarah listened intently, her heart filled with compassion. "Do you wish to return, to make amends?" she asked. The man shook his head. "It is too late for that. What has happened cannot be changed, but I only wish for forgiveness." He looked at Sarah with hope in his eyes. "If anyone could understand and forgive me, perhaps I would find release. Moved by his story, Sarah turned to her friends. "We can help him," she said. "Let's hold a prayer ceremony and ask for his forgiveness." Everyone agreed, and they decided to organize a small ritual right there in the forest. They gathered dry branches and lit a fire, its light creating a sacred atmosphere. Sarah and her friends joined hands and prayed together, hoping the man's spirit would find peace. As the fire blazed, the faceless man stood beside them, his gaze brightening. He could feel the warmth and love radiating from the young people before him. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice seeming to lighten. "I have never received such love." When the ceremony concluded, a gentle breeze swept through, carrying the scent of earth and sky. The faceless man slowly began to fade into the air, leaving behind an unusual sense of tranquility. Sarah and her friends exchanged glances, feeling as though they had just witnessed a miracle. From that day on, the town no longer shared stories about the faceless man. Instead, they spoke of a soul that had been freed, of the love and forgiveness that could change everything. Sarah returned home with a lighter heart. She understood that everyone had their pains and mistakes, but if we dare to face them and seek forgiveness, we might find peace within ourselves.